Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith, and today I am reviewing a book that, by the time you're watching this, I read a very long time ago, but I made a commitment to reviewing every single book on my shelf, so here we are. I am talking about one of my top books of 2020, Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I bought this book myself from Portal Books. I will link them below because I love them. They're one of my favourite online book retailers. Regardless of where I got it from, nobody's paying me to talk about books. All opinions are my own. I'm also going to keep this spoiler free because, as I have mentioned in the past, I think spoiling a mystery book is probably one of the most terrible things you can do. Let's pop you back there, my love. However, I am going to talk a little bit about the plot, so if you want to go into this book knowing absolutely nothing, do click away now because I will not be held responsible for you accidentally spoiling something yourself. Mexican Gothic was one of the big books of 2020. It felt like everyone and their mum was reading it, which begs the question, why am I making this video? Everyone's already read it. So if this is the first time you're hearing about this, I have to just say, where have you been? And are you okay? Mexican Gothic is, you may be able to tell by the title, a gothic horror. And I have to say at this point in the review that horror is not a genre that I have typically read much, if any, of. I am a very novice horror reader. I am not au fait with the various tropes, the various subgenres. It's just not my thing. I read this as primarily a fantasy reader, so that's worth saying at this point. So if you're expecting me to point out where this novel sits in the literary canon and what it's referencing, I'm just not that reviewer for you. I'm sure that person does exist. Silvia Moreno Garcia is an author who I've been reading for a while, sort of without realising it. I read her book The Beautiful Ones, which I believe is now being re-released because of the popularity of Mexican Gothic, but I read that when it originally published in 2017. And I also read Gods of Jade and Shadow, which was a pretty big release when that came out as well. I wasn't such a big fan of Gods of Jade and Shadow, but having loved this, I think I might give it a reread. Silvia Moreno Garcia describes herself on her website as Mexican by birth, Canadian by inclination, and I actually really do highly recommend checking out her website. It's a good one, and she has a lot of other books and works out there in the world which you should definitely check out. I will link that below. Mexican Gothic starts with our main character Noemi, who is known for her glamorous lifestyle and her gorgeous outfits and the parties that she goes to, heading off into the middle of nowhere. And she's going there because her recently married cousin has been sending some questionable letters back home that make it sound like not everything is quite okay with her new husband. So Noemi gets to this very isolated rural mansion, and she immediately begins to suspect that something is not quite right with this family, something is not quite right with this house, and things escalate from there. I'm going to start with what I think is the biggest selling point of this book, and that's atmosphere. As I say, I'm not a huge horror reader, but the fact that I love atmosphere in a book so much makes me think that if I could get over my cowardice, I could probably really enjoy it as a genre. I think that something sinister in fiction can so easily tip into feeling silly or feeling overdone because all you have is the page, whereas horror as a visual medium, you can bring in a lot of sound, you can bring in a lot of lighting effects. This is just all having to give you that tense feeling, but all through your head, which I find so difficult to do, so I have no idea how horror authors do it. But this book walks that line of keeping things very sinister incredibly well. The tension of the house and the pressure of this very strange situation, alongside all of the different kind of social situations that Noemi gets in this story, really make you feel very tense throughout the book. It's like razor sharp. I think that tension was what really kept me going through the book and made me not want to put it down. I'm pretty sure I read this in, if not one sitting, then in two. It's not a jump scare kind of story. It's more a kind of just that little prickle at the back of your neck. I thought that Noemi was a really great main character. I am sorry if I'm pronouncing her name wrong. That's how I feel like it should be pronounced, but I've never heard it out loud. I really liked that we got to see her character get established at the start of the book outside of the context of this story, and then she gets pushed into this sort of unknown environment, and the way that she reacts to that is really well done. And if you didn't have those opening scenes where we get to know her outside of the horror context, I think it would be much less powerful. It's getting to see that really vibrant energy get stifled by this house and by these people. Noemi's kind of representative of the outside world in this story, and that contrast brings out how weird things are in the house. I really liked that she felt like an inquisitive character and that she goes in with a mission, so it doesn't fall into that, no, why are you going down into the basement, you fool, you do not need to go there, you are obviously about to have something terrible happen to you, kind of horror heroine that we know. Noemi's sharper than that. I don't want to get into it in too much detail because I think it will spoil aspects of the book, but I think that the way that Silvia Moreno Garcia weaves in threads of colonialism and explores the idea of white supremacy is really well handled within this story. How do you bring those very real issues into a very speculative book? I overwhelmingly felt that those more fantasy elements of the story, I guess, were perfectly balanced with the historical, and it never felt like one thing was being favoured over the other. So as a reader, you're left with not only the gosh, that was spooky, but also the food for thought of the historical ideas as well. It's one of the main reasons I would recommend picking up this book, to be honest. I think it gives you a lot to think about as a reader. My one nitpick on this book is that I personally didn't go wild for some of the romantic aspects of this story. I think that's a preference thing and other people would enjoy it, but it wasn't for me. As I say, I'm not really a horror reader. I don't have a lot of horror on my shelves, and that which I do have, I either haven't read yet, it's on my TBR over there, or it wouldn't pair nicely with this book. But I will say that I think checking out Silvia Moreno Garcia's other works is probably a very good idea, and I'll be very interested to see what she comes out with next, and hopefully I can have a few more horror recommendations by the end of this year. Should I read more horror before I recommend any horror to you? Maybe. But also I think that as a novice horror reader, or as somebody who isn't that au fait with the genre, I think this is a really good way to step into it. I'm never going to be a person who is really keen to read like the classics of a genre, because I want to know where the genre's at now and want to know where it's got to. I think it's really interesting. I think you always compare other genre books to the kind of first or the early books that you read of that genre, and if this is it for me and horror, the bar is set very high. So yes, I do think you should read this, obviously, but if you do have any other horror recommendations that you think I will like that have similar vibes to this, please do pop them in the comments below. I'm very interested, especially if this video is going up before October. That would be most excellent. Right, I think that's everything. I think that's all I wanted to say on that one. Basically, just go and read it. It's great. While you're down there commenting, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated and motivates me to read, which is always nice. You can also follow me on all of my social media. It's all linked in the description below. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. That was almost not a sentence. While you're down there commenting, you can also subscribe. It makes me feel... I already said that. What am I doing?